follow Mr. Bauer's policy. But you have to think about the impact on the school department. Do you really want to be the first one to do it? Because right now, if I call her on several issues, you know, I can say, hey, what about this? I probably have a pretty good idea what the answer is going to be from my experience and study of school case law. She has school case law, and it's a pretty cut and dry thing. Her point here is there would be no school case law. There would be no case law on this at all. So when the smoke cleared and the flags were redistributed and everything, you know, it would be John Doe versus the North Reading School Committee.
We would be establishing case law.
You would be establishing case law, exactly.
I,
And that's just a real brief summary of what
Right,
you're
and
saying.
I don't-
much more detail.
I think we need to spend a lot of time on this on the 28th. I do want to ask John one question, though, and I'll open it up again to the committee. But on the 6 days versus 3 days, how does that compare with surrounding high schools? Do you know?
No. I can only tell you when I worked in Saugus, if it was an alcohol violation, it was a 10-day service suspension for student.
Alcohol on the premises or
Yes.
school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 3 days seems pretty minimal.
My concern in part of what went into the drafting of the changes that I proposed was that it seems to me in the past year, we've seen a lot of cases where the kids are blowing us off. They just, you know, 3 days, big deal, walk. Take my chances, and that if you stiffen the penalty, that you constrain that some. Which what you said is that if you double it, you know, that's getting to be a bigger deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that in all of the things we do, we always sit there and weigh, well, you know, what's my chances? What's the risk-reward situation? And we should be starting these kids off thinking about risk-reward. And when the risk is higher, then maybe they're going to slow that down.
I agree.
It seems to me we have a problem, and we need to find a way to try to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't disagree. There were more incidents this year than there had been, but that in itself could be an anomaly too. I think the penalty that I propose of the 6-day external suspension applies to everyone and does not then spread the gap between, you know, the unfairness of those that participate in extracurriculars and athletics versus those who don't. This is for everybody. And on top of that, there's a penalty to be paid for your extracurricular and athletic participation. Yeah, I think the school-based penalty is looked upon differently by parents and by students. I think that is looked upon as more of something that I need to work myself out of the hole on, so to speak. And that, you know, but again, we're bringing you back too. We're not causing you to be out so much that you're going to fail classes or lose credit or something like that. But we're saying this is something we feel very strongly about, and we're going to send a strong message to you that we do not want this happening while you're under our jurisdiction as a student. And if you do, if you violate it, this is what's going to happen, and know ahead of time going into it. And on top of that, if you're active in your school community through sports or extracurriculars, you're going to pay this penalty as well. My recommendation would be that it stay as under the MIAA's. You know, we in 2008 the penalty changed quite a bit under the MIAA. It's only been 2 years that the whole season versus the school year changed. And if you remember, we were 1 year ahead of that. North Reading was 1 year ahead of it. I had proposed to you in 2007 that we go from the first day of school to the last day of school. That was not the MIAA's policy that year. It was the seasonal. Right. So a lot has happened in just two to 3 years. And then in 2008, MIAA adopted the non-season and went from September to June, basically.
It actually starts when they start the August.
First official day of fall practice, right? Correct. So it could be, in August. That is, and I've had a tobacco violation in the summer, through a double session. But I think that in and of itself is, my personal opinion is that policy is sufficient. I see the gap. I see the idea that, what are we saying about July and August? But I think at some point the purview of the school and the authority of the school to be able to invoke policy has to have definition to it, and can't be.
The interesting thing to me,
365.
John, is that the MIAA is allowed to expand out beyond school and school-related activities.
Yeah.
So the MIAA is saying, we have jurisdiction over anything the kid does anywhere except for July and August.
But there's a reason behind that now. And the reason behind that was because principals felt that the policy was not appropriate. And that's why I recommended the change in 2007. We saw the gap between, you know, just because you played only a fall sport, but you played fall, winter, and spring, you were held more culpable.
Right.
That's why. So principals in the MIAA rallied around the idea that there was a huge inequity. Is there a gap now? There is, but I don't think there's an inequity. We were confronted with situations as principals where you could have a student who played a winter sport and got caught in the wintertime, and a student who played only a spring sport but got caught in the wintertime. You'd have two kids together and only one of them paid a penalty. It was unfair. It wasn't right. That kind of thing happened. Now you've got a standard that no matter what season you play in, if you don't happen to be a three-season sport athlete, you would pay a price in your next season. So that's where the cry came from. It came from the principals saying that we saw a huge disparity. The summertime, it is in question, but I think, you know what, I think at some point the school's range of authority it has to be limited at some point. And I think that is a case, and we just hope for the best for our kids to be safe and that parents work with them to do the right thing, and I think by and large that happens, but we're always going to have, I mean, I've dealt with situations where students unfortunately were killed as a result of a drunk driving accident. You know what? I've dealt with it since, so it doesn't, not in this community, but it's you know, what more needs to happen to send a message that, look, don't do this, but, you know, there are going to be those who test, and
So
that's my opinion of it.
In the 6-day penalty, school-based penalty, you get 2 of those, and you're in big trouble from an academic standpoint.
Well, no, because I think you can't miss 10 of a specific class unexcused. So even if you got 2 of those, you'd be missing 6 and 6, right?
You'd be, I mean,
You'd be
that's
close
a
to
huge
get,
disadvantage,
you'd be
right.
close.
But you're out there on
Right,
the
you're on the
correct.
edge, right.
And that's assuming you have no other absences from school.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So you're on the edge.
But the goal isn't to be, you know, solely punitive in that. It's to say that, you know, look, if you're compromising a lot more if you're gonna do this. I mean, you all know me well enough that it's not, you know, that's not what I'm about. The whole educational piece has been huge. You know what we've done for programs at the high school, and I'll continue to do that. But I'm recommending that 6-day suspension because I have heard from parents and students whether it was last year at the roundtable discussions we held, or kids in my office saying to them, boy, you knew what was gonna happen. Why did you do it? You know what? There was a greater chance I wouldn't get caught than I would. Those are the kinds of things that get said to me, very respectfully, but you know what, I ran the risk. That, I think, is too bad, you know, and I think we need to say, well, now you're really, this is what you're putting at risk now. So.
I just want to ask something. I think it would be helpful if I had some numbers to think about this issue, because I'm actually, the reason why we decided to change this policy was really motivated by changing the way in which coaches treat their players.
Right, it
And
was
this
inconsistent.
launched into chemical health and other issues. And what I would like to know and understand better are how our rules currently work or not work, and where the gaps are. Because at this moment, I have no idea how many kids every year violate our alcohol policy and our drug policy, and how many are repeaters. How often does that happen? And I want to know that our policies, how effective they are now, before we make a change. And there are a number of changes being contemplated, not just the ones on the full year, but guilt by association is on the table as well. So we need to think about this, I think, with some concrete numbers. And if you could just, you know, if you know now,
Sure.
to give me a ballpark, but, you know, if you want to provide that to us while we're having this discussion in our next meeting, I think that would be extremely helpful to me, and I'm sure the committee would appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd be interested if, you know, if the numbers are fairly consistent. The other thing that we've asked a number of times and never really gotten a real answer, but just a feeling, is how do we compare with other communities, surrounding communities? And everything we've heard is, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, it's not, we meet monthly as Cape Ann principals. It's not
Very similar problems in all the communities.
It's kind of the old, it's the 5%, 95%, there's been, 5% affected type of thing, but 90%, 5% of our time. As far as to the point of the coach enforcement, I can tell you that the coach, the individual coaches, that the policy is being enforced consistently. The language of the policy says that it is recommended that the student participate in practice. It is not said that the student shall or shall not. It's the recommendation. So within the spirit of that is that the coach has discretion to allow the coach to, so that piece of the rule
And I
is
think that's our
enforced
issue.
consistently.
That's, I think, an issue with most of the, has been an issue with most of the committee since that's where we started.
To me, I think that discretionary piece is appropriate. I think the coach has to have that, just like I think the teacher has to have that discretion.
But I guess along those same lines, and again, we're going down the rat hole, but since you're here,
It's important.
if a coach, you're talking about, you say you think the MIA penalties are sufficient,
I think they're appropriate.
Appropriate, correct. But yet, if one coach or two coaches decide, we're gonna snub this kid, he's not gonna be allowed, or she's not gonna be allowed to practice, what kind of penalty is that, where the kid is just totally, basically thrown off the team? I mean, if the kid's not allowed to practice, they're thrown off the team for X number of weeks, whereas other coaches are saying the kid can practice every day, and at least still have something within their, within their extracurricular lives to do on a daily basis. I think that's the thing that's.
Well, you could apply that same philosophy to the whole proposal that you have on the table. I mean, we're saying that he'll be gone for a year.
Right, well, that's, right. I mean, that was, I don't think there was less agreement on that, but.
I don't think we should let, my personal opinion is I don't think we should let one person's exercising his or her discretion as a coach to allow a child to practice to drive the whole policy change. If there's an issue with one incident, then that's the incident that should be addressed. I don't think the whole policy, if we start saying that you have to practice, I personally would be very much opposed to that. That's because now we're getting to the point where, you have to assign 10 algebra problems tonight, and you have to assign 12. And I think the coaches, like teachers, often have more information available to them, and sometimes have differing views on what they're trying to accomplish by telling it. We don't know what the conversations might be ahead of time with a student, what warnings may be given. I think that kind of discretion is important for a coach and a teacher to have. That's my opinion of it. But if we're saying, we want you to be able to practice, but you could also be gone for a year, then it runs counter, Mel, I think, to your point on, we're keeping kids involved. We're allowing students, the penalty exists for, whatever it is, the 25%. Sometimes it's 5 games, sometimes it's 2. There's a value in redemption. You're welcomed back, but you may not have as active a role as you thought you were going to have, either during the suspension or when you come back. So.
Well, I think that's understandable, and I agree with you that there's, if we were to say you're out for a year in your third violation, but you're going to
or any violation, first violation too, if you're driving a car.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I personally disagree with that. I think you know that from tonight. I absolutely disagree with that, respectfully.
So I think
Is there a school, what's the school policy on getting caught drunk driving?
There isn't one. There's a legal.
Yeah, that's referred.
It would fall under the alcohol possession use.
but again, we have
So
no
it'd be a 6-day
jurisdiction.
suspension.
No, only if it's a school-related.
Right, so if it's
Yeah.
not school related.
Yeah.
It would be the 25% of an athletic season.
Right, only the athletic and extracurricular.
Right,
But
and then.
you still have the legal ramifications.
Correct.
Right,
If a
we
kid's
do
caught
notification.
driving under the influence,
Right, they have to go.
And
they've got to go to court.
And I think Nancy McGuire raises some good issues some good questions in her opinion about the enforcement of that, and how it may not be able to be properly enforced because of the legal consequences that might be confronting if the student is driving a car. I think she makes some good points in that portion of her opinion.
Personally, I wouldn't want to set any precedent or get into any legal cases that would set a precedent. I think it'd be very costly, and that's the first thing we would have to ask ourselves and not even look at the policy in the next meeting.
I think hopefully
It's a serious issue.
On this issue, we'll close, that we can review Nancy's feedback, the information that Dr. Manville gave us related to what he got from the MIAA. Maybe even have Nancy here next meeting, we'll talk about it. And we'll discuss this at the next meeting. Tonight on the policy, I think the only semi-controversial thing to me is going from the